Around 3 months ago, I randomly heard this bop and decided to watch the anime featuring it because that's how my brain works. But then I got lazy and decided to read 140 chapters of the manga instead, because that's also how my brain works. It took a while, but now I'm fully caught up with Call of the Night, and I want to talk about it while the adaptation is between seasons, and hype for the series has completely died down. Despite being set in a nameless Japanese city, Call of the Night has one of the best fictional settings I've experienced in quite a while, which is really weird if you stop and think about it. All fiction has to be set somewhere, but I don't get a sense of place from the majority of the settings I experience. Before we talk more about why Call of the Night is an exception to the rule, I think it would be a good idea to talk about how settings are handled across multiple mediums. Setting as a narrative device can sometimes be treated like the little brother of storytelling, and I've noticed it is often overlooked in movies, TV shows, and anime in favor of plot and character. This is probably because it's really difficult to sell a viewer on a place. A place can't communicate with an audience verbally. It can't charm you with a quip or intrigue you with a bit of vague exposition. To know a setting is to live there, something you can't do in these mediums, but you can do in this one. Video games by their very nature are interactive, and that interaction, the ability to move the camera yourself, comes with a lot of baked-in enticement. As you explore a world at your own pace and choose which actions to take and details to take in, it becomes surprisingly easy to form memories and attachments to a video game world. Aperture Science, Raccoon City, Stardew Valley, New Vegas, New Mombasa, Night City, Hyrule. I have memories in all of these places, even though I've never physically been to any of them. And this is not an easy feeling to invoke. Selling a fictional setting is really hard. In particular, when that setting is presented in live action. Live action movies and TV shows have to spend a lot of time, or money, or both, to teach their audiences what makes their fictional setting different from our own day-to-day world and why those differences matter. Think about the constant educational lectures about the danger of the desert in Dune, or the literal map that appears at the beginning of every Game of Thrones episode. A series that itself is about vying for control over land. All of this world building takes time, and anything that takes time also takes production resources. Anime is no different. There's a reason so many anime take place in generic fantasy worlds and boring high school classrooms. These are known quantities that a viewer can instantly understand and an animator can more easily design. They aren't really interesting, but they get the job done. Now, I've claimed that settings are difficult to express across multiple mediums in fiction, and I think that's true. They are difficult, but not impossible. They just take time, and by time, I mean longer than a quick establishing shot. In my mind, you need at least a good montage or a set filled with convincing extras, and that's time-consuming and expensive. Are there ways to get around this? Well, when a story is too busy trying to move from moment to moment, or is constrained by time like most TV and theater experiences are, setting can and will fall by the wayside. However, there are a few cheats good storytellers can use to establish a setting more easily, and we can talk about a few. One of my favorites is music. If you set a location to a bit of memorable music, suddenly less time is needed for that location to stand out because an audience is being taught about the location visually and auditorily at the same time. It's arguably twice as effective. This is certainly a memorable visual, so much so that it made it to the poster, but this scene with music conveys so much more. And that's enough of that. When I first heard that John Williams score as a kid, it made my dumb little underdeveloped brain feel all the right feelings needed to accept that a castle with moving staircases, magic, and mystery could exist. And every time I hear that theme as an adult, I do still briefly get transported back to that age when my feelings on Harry Potter were a lot simpler, to say the least. Music can be pretty damn powerful. Even if you're not paying attention to all the work an individual track does to set a mood or create a memory, it still has an effect on your perception of a story or a place within one. Call of the Night, see, I got there eventually. Call of the Night's anime uses this trick to great effect. The soundtrack uses background music that is spacey, ethereal, and at times funky, to evoke the mysterious vibes given off by a city at night, while the opening and ending evoke the night's more exciting and enticing characteristics by being just all-around bops. If you are unaware, this is a series about a teenager named Kou who decides abruptly to drop out of school and society in general. Kou spends his days lying around as a shut-in at home, but this lack of activity results in him becoming an insomniac. He can't sleep, so he decides to start wandering his hometown at night, where he will be unbothered by other people. Kou's hometown is a fairly generic-looking city. It's almost featureless during the day. Gray buildings, sun-bleached streets. Kou rejects how monotonous his life as an honors student has become, and these daytime visuals reinforce those feelings he's trying to escape. But his perception of the same nameless city is quickly transformed when he begins exploring it at night. How do we know this? Well, just listen to how the anime's background music sets the tone for Kou's first walk before he's even shown taking a single step. Yeah, there isn't a street musician around the next corner. That song represents how Kou feels about the night, and how you're supposed to be feeling about it. Can you feel it? That call of the night? Kou certainly can. He's enchanted by it, immediately, before he's even met his first vampire. Oh yeah, this series is also about vampires, but we'll get there. So that's music covered, but how else does Call of the Night sell a setting as generic as the hours between sunset and sunrise? And how did its manga counterpart convey the night's seduction without the ability to use sound at all? I mentioned earlier that there are multiple tricks a good storyteller can use to convey setting. We've already talked about music, a tool that manipulates an audience using sound in order to better convey the emotions of a story or a story's setting. So now let's dive into another sense: sight. Art direction is tricky to talk about, especially for someone like me making grand observations like music is good and emotional, maybe. What makes a series' art direction stand out is hard to explain, and it's at least somewhat subjective. But I think it's a bit like porn. You know it when you see it. And I'm pretty sure I'm seeing it here. There's a consistency to Call of the Night's presentation. It's really satisfying to watch how this series plays with light, reflections, and if it's not obvious at this point, color. Seriously, these are some of the wildest looking skies I've seen in an anime since Morio, and comparing anything to Diamond is Unbreakable is high praise. The nighttime scenes in Call of the Night's anime are always bathed in this sort of inviting glow, which is really fitting considering we are seeing these streets through Kou's perspective. Everything feels safe. But the characters and the scenery also have a bit of a sharp edge to them. I don't know if this is because of the thickness of the lines they are drawn with, or just because of a clash of colors, but you can really see what I'm talking about at the point where their shapes clash with these starbrushed skies and lamplit underpasses. It creates an interesting effect, almost like the series and its characters are existing at the fringes of the real and the ethereal, and that maybe those two ideas are competing in some way. Somehow, Call of the Night's manga is also able to pull off this contrast between characters and the backgrounds they visit, while only having shades of black and white to work with. One neat trick it uses often to emphasize its cast is allowing them to exist across multiple panels at once. This is Nazuna. She's really important. How can you tell? Well, she's able to fly across every panel of this page, literally, and her cloak even keeps going entirely past the borders of where this composition is supposed to end. It's neat. This sort of framing is also really important for this series in particular because it's trying to convey how the characters experience this nighttime setting. Sometimes they embody it, sometimes they are swallowed up by it, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. That's fitting. Call of the Night is a story about an outcast seeking fulfillment outside of normal everyday life. Kou is enchanted by the first vampire he meets, Nazuna, not because of who she is, but how she lives. In fact, he's pretty explicitly not in love with her. That's actually the condition he must meet to become a vampire, a path he decides upon almost immediately at the start of the story. This is certainly an extreme viewpoint to take after one nighttime stroll, and Kou's reasoning and convictions are continually being called into question by other characters throughout the series. Some really interesting conflicts emerge from this premise, but I'll save that for you to discover yourself if you choose to read or watch this series. Throwing away your old life, seemingly on a whim, is probably not the healthiest mindset, but I do kind of get it. Going to school, getting good grades, getting into a better school, finishing that, getting a job, getting too used to doing that day after day, life can be tedious. Don't you ever just wish you could become someone else? Isn't that why you're watching this stuff? I can tell you, wandering around my own hometown at night is not nearly as inviting, but it is still a bit mystical. So, what's the point of this video? To convince you that Call of the Night is a visually and sonically pleasing series with an unusually strong, if a bit vague setting? Well, yes, but I also want to explain why I think this series is more special than your average seasonal offering, and I want to somehow do that without spoiling anything. Here's what I will say. Typically, the anime I enjoy either have a strong premise or a great cast. A powerless protagonist in a world full of superheroes. Strong premise. A will they, won't they love story set in a high school. Terribly boring premise. But hey, that's a great group of kids. Strong premise. Great cast. Strong premise. Great cast. Occasionally, you get a story that can do both. And these are some of my favorite series ever. Call of the Night, at least at first, has neither. It's a vampire story with a protagonist who seems underwhelming, a love interest who seems like just a collection of tropes, and a premise that bumps right up against some of my least favorite trends in anime. If you pitched this series to me as a story about an underachieving middle schooler who a bunch of sexy vampires inexplicitly find attractive, I would throw it on the skip pile along with all the other wish fulfillment series that crop up once or twice a season. But I didn't. Maybe I started reading it because I like wandering around at night myself, or because I also have trouble sleeping. Something about these inky black streets and quiet, reflective chapters kept me reading when I would have otherwise stopped. I feel like I know this unnamed city, even if my own looks nothing like it. Yeah, we somehow got back to talking about setting. Call of the Night has a strong one that really endeared me to the series, which is good because almost nothing consequential happens in the story for over 30 chapters. And I think that's actually a good thing. Remember back in the day when anime pacing was pretty slow and meandering? Well, I'm not going to say that feeling of, what are we even doing here, has completely gone away, but as anime has transitioned into the seasonal and split core format as the norm, everything has started to feel a lot faster. Call of the Night isn't. A lot of the chapters and episodes of the series are about pretty inconsequential moments in Kou's day-to-day or night-to-night life. Visiting a pool, chatting with a former teacher, or just sitting in a park or dingy apartment and talking to someone you care about. It's slow, meandering, and once it starts to find its feet, surprisingly mature. Nothing really important is said, but these moments captured when the world gets quiet do matter. They matter to the middle schooler who wants to leave his life behind, to the immortal vampires he finds trying to live in the moment, and to all the other lost strangers found wandering the streets at night. And yeah, I don't know when it happened, but they started to matter to me.